The sun was shining brightly over the small regional airport, casting long shadows across the tarmac. The private jet gleamed under the morning light, its polished surface reflecting the clear blue sky above. Inside the cockpit, Eric Dawson sat, with his hands resting on the controls going through the pre-flight checklist. Eric was a seasoned pilot in his late 40s, with salt and pepper hair and a confident demeanor that came from years of flying high-profile clients around the world. But today, something felt slightly off. Eric glanced out of the cockpit window as he saw the last few passengers boarding the plane. Most of them were familiar faces, business people, a couple traveling for leisure, and a young woman who looked like she was heading to an important meeting. Everything seemed normal until his eyes caught sight of someone unexpected. A tall, broad-shouldered man wearing a leather jacket and jeans was walking toward the aircraft. His gait was calm but purposeful, and there was an air of authority about him that made Eric pause. The man's skin was dark, and while Eric tried not to let appearances cloud his judgment, something about the stranger raised red flags in his mind. He wasn't dressed like the other passengers who wore tailored suits or business casual attire. And more importantly, Eric didn't recognize him from the passenger manifest he had reviewed earlier. Who was this person? Why did he look so comfortable, approaching the plane as if he belonged there? Eric leaned forward in his seat, squinting slightly to get a better look. The man reached the steps leading up to the jet and began climbing them without hesitation. That sealed it for Eric. This wasn't just some curious passerby. This was someone who clearly intended to board the aircraft, but why? Was he lost? Did he think this was his flight? Or worse, was he trying to sneak onto the plane? Eric's instincts kicked into high gear. Pilots were trained to prioritize. Safety above all else, and anything out of the ordinary needed to be addressed immediately. Without wasting another second, Eric unbuckled himself from his chair and stepped out of the cockpit. As he walked down the narrow aisle of the luxurious cabin, he could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. He had to act quickly before the situation escalated further. When Eric emerged from the plane, he found the stranger already inside, standing near one of the plush leather seats. Up close, the man's presence was even more imposing. He stood, tall, and carried himself with quiet confidence, exuding an aura of strength and control. Eric cleared his throat loudly to get his attention. "Excuse me," he said firmly, his voice cutting through the hum of murmurs from the other passengers. "Can I help you?" The man turned to face him, his expression unreadable. "I'm Jason Carter," he replied calmly, his deep voice carrying a hint of curiosity. "I own this jet." Eric blinked, taken aback by the response. Owner. That couldn't be right. If Jason Carter truly owned the plane, Eric would have known about it. Owners typically communicated directly with the crew ahead of time, providing details about their travel plans and preferences. Besides, the name didn't match any of the information Eric had been given. Something wasn't adding up. "I'm sorry," Eric said, narrowing his eyes slightly. "But your name isn't on the manifest. Are you sure you're supposed to be here?" Jason tilted his head slightly, studying Eric with a mixture of patience and amusement. "You can check again if you'd like," he said evenly. "But I assure you, I belong here." Despite Jason's calm demeanor, Eric remained unconvinced. Too many things didn't add up. The casual clothing, the lack of prior communication, and the fact that no one else seemed to know who he was. Eric decided to err on the side of caution. Nodding curtly, he stepped back toward the cockpit to radio airport security. Within minutes, 2 uniformed officers arrived at the scene, responding to Eric's report of a potential intruder. "What seems to be the problem?" one of the officers asked, glancing between Eric and Jason. "This man claims to own the jet," Eric explained quickly, gesturing toward Jason. "But he's not on the manifest and his behavior is suspicious. I think he might be trespassing." The officer nodded and approached Jason, who raised an eyebrow but didn't resist when they asked him to step outside. Handcuffs clicked into place around his wrists, drawing gasps from some of the passengers still seated inside the plane. One of them, a young woman named Rachel Monroe, watched the scene unfold with growing unease. She had noticed Jason when he first entered the cabin, and hadn't thought much of it at the time. Now, however, doubt crept into her mind. There was something about the way he carried himself, so composed, so unbothered, that didn't fit the image of a criminal. As the officers escorted Jason away, Rachel hesitated, unsure whether to intervene. She glanced at Eric, who stood nearby, looking relieved yet tense. He caught her eye briefly and gave a small nod as if to reassure her that everything was under control. But Rachel wasn't so sure. Something about the entire situation felt off. Back inside the terminal, Jason remained remarkably calm despite being detained. He had been in far worse situations during his time as a Navy SEAL, and this minor inconvenience barely registered on his radar. Still, he couldn't help but reflect on how quickly assumptions could spiral out of control. People often judged based on appearances, and Jason had learned to live with that reality. What mattered most was how he responded, and right now, he chose to stay silent and let the truth reveal itself in due time. Meanwhile, Eric returned to the cockpit to double-check the passenger manifest. He flipped through the pages carefully, scanning each name until his eyes landed on one entry that stopped him cold. Jason Carter, owner. His heart sank as realization hit him like a punch to the gut. Oh no, he thought, his stomach churning. With dread, I've made a terrible mistake. For a moment, Eric sat frozen in his seat, staring at the words on the page. How could he have been so wrong? Not only had he falsely accused the owner of the jet, but he had also caused a scene that embarrassed everyone involved. Worst of all, he had no idea what kind of fallout awaited him once Jason returned, or if he would even forgive such a grave error. Taking a deep breath, Eric knew he had to fix this. But where to begin? Outside, Rachel couldn't shake the nagging feeling that she should do something. She grabbed her phone and opened a search engine, typing in Jason Carter private jet, owner. Almost instantly, articles popped up detailing his impressive accomplishments, not just as a successful entrepreneur but as a decorated Navy SEAL whose bravery had saved countless lives. Her jaw dropped as she scrolled through the headlines. This wasn't just some random guy, this was a hero. Rachel closed her phone, her mind racing. She had to find a way to make things right. Little did she know, her decision to dig deeper would set off a chain of events that would change the course of the day for everyone on board. Eric Dawson sat in the cockpit, staring at the passenger manifest with a mix of disbelief and shame. The name Jason Carter was clearly printed on the page, followed by the words, owner. Eric's mind raced as he tried to piece together how he could have missed such an obvious detail. He had reviewed the list multiple times before takeoff. How had this slipped past him? The realization hit hard. It wasn't just a simple oversight. His judgment had been clouded by assumptions, and now those assumptions had led to a humiliating mistake. Taking a deep breath, Eric knew what he had to do next. He couldn't sit here and pretend nothing had happened. Jason Carter deserved an apology. Not just any apology, but one that acknowledged the gravity of the situation. Eric stepped out of the cockpit once again, his face flushed with embarrassment. As he walked down the aisle of the luxurious cabin, he avoided making eye contact with the passengers who were still seated. Some looked curious, others annoyed, and a few seemed indifferent, but none of them knew the full story yet. When Eric reached the front of the plane, he paused for a moment to collect himself. Then, stepping off the jet onto the tarmac, he approached the airport security officers who were standing near their vehicle. Jason Carter was nowhere to be seen, which made Eric's stomach twist even tighter. "Excuse me," Eric said, addressing one of the officers. "Where is Mr. Carter?" "He's inside the terminal holding area," the officer replied, his tone neutral but firm. "We're keeping him there until we sort things out." Eric nodded, his heart pounding. "Listen, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I just checked the manifest again, and Mr. Carter is indeed listed as the owner of this jet. I made a mistake." The officer raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "Are you sure about that?" "Yes," Eric insisted, his voice cracking, slightly under the weight of his guilt. "I'm positive. Can you please bring him back so I can explain everything?" After a brief hesitation, the officer radioed his partner and confirmed the details. A few minutes later, Jason Carter emerged from the terminal building, flanked by 2 security personnel. His hands were no longer cuffed, and his expression remained calm, almost serene. If he felt any anger or frustration about what had happened, he didn't show it. Instead, he walked toward Eric with measured steps, his dark eyes locking onto the pilot's face. "Mr. Carter," Eric began, his voice trembling as he extended a hand, "I owe you an apology. I didn't recognize you earlier, and I jumped to conclusions without checking properly. This is entirely my fault, and I deeply regret putting you through this." Jason studied Eric for a moment before shaking his hand. "Apology accepted," he said simply, his tone steady and devoid of malice. "It happens." Eric blinked, caught off guard by Jason's composure. He had expected anger, maybe even hostility, but instead, Jason seemed almost unfazed by the entire ordeal. Still, Eric pressed on, desperate to make amends. "I'll personally ensure that nothing like this ever happens again. And if there's anything I can do to make up for this, please let me know." Jason nodded slowly, his gaze softening slightly. "Thank you," he said. "Honestly, I've dealt with worse. Let's just move forward." With that, Jason turned and headed back toward the jet, leaving Eric standing there stunned by the man's grace and humility. For someone who had just been wrongfully detained, Jason showed remarkable restraint. It was clear that he wasn't interested in dwelling on the incident or seeking revenge. Instead, he appeared focused on getting back to business and perhaps teaching Eric a lesson in the process. Back inside the plane, Rachel Monroe watched as Jason re-entered the cabin. Her heart sank when she saw the faint red marks on his wrists where the handcuffs had been. She couldn't believe what had just unfolded right in front of her. How could anyone look at Jason and assume he was a threat? He radiated confidence and authority, yes, but not in a way that screamed danger. Quite the opposite. He seemed approachable, even kind. Rachel glanced around the cabin, noticing that several other passengers were whispering amongst themselves. Some looked sympathetic toward Jason, while others seemed more concerned about the delay caused by the incident. No one spoke directly to him, though, which struck Rachel as odd. Shouldn't they be apologizing too? After all, they had witnessed the whole thing unfold. Why weren't they saying something? Feeling a surge of courage, Rachel unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. She hesitated for a moment, unsure whether approaching Jason was the right move. What would she even say? But then she remembered the articles she had read on her phone, the ones detailing Jason's heroic actions as a Navy SEAL. If anyone deserved kindness and respect, it was him. Walking over to where Jason had taken his seat near the front of the plane, Rachel cleared her throat softly to get his attention. "Excuse me, Mr. Carter," she said, her voice gentle but steady. "I just wanted to say, I'm really sorry about what happened. That must have been incredibly frustrating." Jason looked up at her, his expression unreadable at first. Then, slowly, a small smile spread across his face. "Thank you," he said, his voice warm and reassuring. "It's not easy being judged based on appearances, but I try not to let it bother me too much." Rachel nodded, feeling a wave of admiration wash over her. "Still, it shouldn't have happened. You didn't deserve to be treated that way." Jason shrugged lightly, leaning back in his seat. "People see what they expect to see. It's human nature. But I've learned that holding on to anger doesn't help anyone. Life's too short for that." His words resonated deeply with Rachel, who had always struggled with self-doubt and perfectionism. Growing up, she had often felt like she wasn't good enough, constantly comparing herself to others and worrying about what people thought of her. Hearing Jason talk about letting go of negativity inspired her in a way she hadn't anticipated. Here was a man who had faced unimaginable challenges and come out stronger on the other side. And yet, he carried himself with such humility and grace. Curiosity got the better of her, and Rachel decided to ask the question that had been lingering in her mind since she read those articles online. "If you don't mind me asking, what was it like serving as a Navy SEAL? I mean, I know you've done amazing things, but I can't even begin to imagine what that experience was like." Jason chuckled softly, his smile widening. Well, it's definitely not for everyone, he admitted. There were days when I questioned whether I could keep going, but at the end of the day it wasn't just about me, it was about protecting others. Knowing that my team and I were making a difference kept me going, even during the toughest moments. Rachel listened intently, hanging on every word. She found herself captivated by Jason's stories, especially the one about a daring rescue mission overseas. According to the article she had read, Jason had single-handedly neutralized enemy forces to save a group of hostages, including several children. When she asked him about it, he downplayed his role, attributing the success of the mission to his teammates rather than himself. It sounds like you're being modest, Rachel teased gently, earning a chuckle from Jason. I just did my job, he replied, and I was lucky enough to have great people by my side. As they continued talking, Rachel realized that Jason's humility wasn't an act, it was genuine. Despite his accomplishments, he remained grounded, focusing on the bigger picture rather than personal glory. By the time their conversation ended, Rachel felt a newfound sense of clarity about her own life. Maybe she didn't need to be perfect all the time. Maybe it was okay to embrace imperfection and focus on doing good work, just like Jason had done. Meanwhile, Eric returned to the cockpit, his mind swirling with thoughts about what had transpired. He replayed the events in his head, analyzing every decision he had made and wondering how he could prevent something like this from happening again. One thing was certain. He would never forget this day, or the lesson it had taught him about assumptions and empathy. As the plane prepared for takeoff, the atmosphere on board began to shift. The initial tension gave way to a quieter, more reflective mood. Passengers exchanged glances, some offering silent nods of acknowledgement to Jason. Though no one else approached him directly, it was clear that the incident had left an impression on everyone present. For Jason, however, the ordeal was already fading into the background. As the engines roared to life and the jet taxied down the runway, he closed his eyes and leaned back in his seat, allowing himself a moment of peace. Despite the morning's challenges, he felt grateful for the opportunity to travel, for the support of his loved ones, and for the resilience that had carried him through life's ups and downs. And somewhere in the rows behind him, Rachel sat, quietly, her thoughts drifting to the lesson she had learned. Inspired by Jason's courage and humility, she resolved to approach her own journey with renewed determination and optimism. Little did she know, this chance encounter would stay with her long after the flight landed, a reminder that sometimes the most unexpected moments can lead to profound growth and change. The private jet soared smoothly through the sky, its engines humming softly as it carried its passengers toward their destination. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere had shifted from tense and awkward to calm and reflective. For Jason Carter, the ordeal on the tarmac felt like a distant memory. He sat quietly in his seat near the front of the plane, his eyes closed as he leaned back against the plush leather headrest. Despite everything that had happened, he appeared completely at ease, almost as if the incident hadn't affected him at all. Rachel Monroe, seated a few rows behind him, couldn't stop thinking about their earlier conversation. Jason's words about letting go of anger, focusing on what truly mattered, and finding strength in adversity had struck a chord deep within her. She had always been someone who overanalyzed every decision, second-guessed herself constantly, and worried endlessly about how others perceived her. But listening to Jason talk about his experiences made her realize that life was too precious to waste on negativity or self-doubt. Curiosity still burned inside her, though. While Jason had shared some insights into his time as a Navy SEAL, Rachel knew there was so much more to his story. How did someone go from serving in one of the most elite military units in the world to owning a private jet and running a successful business? What challenges had he faced along the way? And how had he managed to stay grounded despite achieving so much? Unable to resist the urge to learn more, Rachel unbuckled her seatbelt and approached Jason once again. This time she held 2 cups of coffee, one for herself and one for him. "Mind if I join you?" she asked cautiously, offering him the steaming cup. Jason opened his eyes and smiled warmly. "Of course," he said, gesturing to the empty seat beside him. "Thanks for the coffee." Rachel settled into the seat, feeling slightly nervous but determined to make the most of this rare opportunity. "I hope you don't mind me asking more questions," she began hesitantly. "But your stories are really inspiring. I'd love to hear more about your journey, if you're comfortable sharing, that is." Jason took a sip of his coffee and nodded thoughtfully. "I don't mind," he replied. "It's not often I get to talk about these things with someone who's genuinely interested." Over the next hour, Jason opened up about his life in a way that surprised even himself. He started by talking about his childhood, growing up in a tough neighborhood where opportunities were scarce and challenges were constant. His family didn't have much, but they instilled in him values of hard work, discipline, and perseverance. From an early age, Jason knew he wanted something better for himself, but he also understood that achieving his dreams would require sacrifice. "When I graduated high school, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do," Jason explained. "I considered college, but honestly, I didn't think I was ready for it yet. So I joined the military instead. It seemed like a good way to gain experience, build character, and figure out my next steps." Rachel listened intently, captivated by every detail. "Did you always know you wanted to become a Navy SEAL?" she asked. Jason shook his head. "Not at first. The idea came later, after I'd been in the Navy for a while. I saw what the SEALs did, their level of skill, their dedication, and I knew I wanted to be part of that team. But getting there wasn't easy. The training was brutal, both physically and mentally. There were days when I thought about quitting, but I reminded myself why I started, and eventually I made it through." Rachel marveled at his determination. "That must have been incredibly difficult," she said. "How did you push through?" "It's all about mindset," Jason replied. "You have to focus on the bigger picture. Sure, the obstacles seem impossible in the moment, but if you keep reminding yourself of your purpose, you'll find a way to overcome them. My team helped too. We pushed each other to our limits, but we also supported one another. That bond is something I'll never forget." As Jason continued sharing his experiences, Rachel found herself hanging onto every word. He spoke about the missions he had been part of, the dangers he had faced, and the lives he had saved. One story stood out in particular, a harrowing rescue operation where Jason and his team had infiltrated enemy territory to save a group of hostages, including several children. The mission had been risky, requiring precision and bravery under extreme pressure. But thanks to Jason's leadership and quick thinking, everyone had made it out alive. "That sounds terrifying," Rachel admitted, her voice filled with awe. "How do you stay calm in situations like that?" Jason chuckled softly. "You don't always feel calm," he confessed, "but you learn to control your emotions and focus on the task at hand. Fear doesn't disappear, it's always there, but you can't let it paralyze you. You just have to take it one step at a time." Rachel nodded, absorbing his wisdom. "And after your service, how did you transition into entrepreneurship? That seems like such a big leap." Jason smiled, leaning back in his seat. "It was definitely a challenge," he admitted. "When I left the military, I had to figure out how to apply the skills I'd learned in a completely different environment. At first, I worked for a few companies, gaining experience in leadership and management. Then I decided to take the plunge and start my own business. It wasn't easy. I faced setbacks and failures, but I kept going because I believed in what I was building." Rachel was amazed by his resilience. "What drives you?" she asked. "What keeps you motivated?" "For me, it's about impact," Jason replied. "Whether I'm serving my country or running a company, I want to make a difference. I want to create opportunities for others and leave the world a little better than I found it. That's what gets me out of bed every morning." By the time their conversation ended, Rachel felt inspired in ways she hadn't anticipated. Jason's journey, from humble beginnings to becoming a decorated hero and successful entrepreneur, was nothing short of extraordinary. Yet what impressed her most was his humility. Despite all he had accomplished, he remained grounded, focusing not on personal glory but on helping others and making a positive impact. Meanwhile, Eric Dawson sat in the cockpit, reflecting on the events of the day. Though he hadn't spoken to Jason since apologizing earlier, he couldn't shake the feeling of guilt that lingered in the back of his mind. He replayed the incident over and over, analyzing every decision he had made and wondering how he could have handled things differently. What bothered him most was the realization that his assumptions had led to such a grave mistake. He had judged Jason based on appearances, without taking the time to verify the facts. And now, he had to live with the consequences of that error. As the flight progressed, Eric resolved to use this experience as a learning opportunity. He vowed to approach every situation with greater care and empathy moving forward, ensuring that he never let biases cloud his judgment again. Though he doubted he could fully make amends for what had happened, he hoped that Jason's forgiveness was genuine and that the incident wouldn't tarnish their relationship permanently. Back in the cabin, the other passengers began to relax, as well. Some chatted quietly among themselves while others read books or worked on laptops. The initial tension had dissipated, replaced by a sense of normalcy. Still, there was an unspoken understanding among everyone present. The events of the morning had left an indelible mark. For Rachel, the hours passed quickly as she reflected on her conversation with Jason. She realized that meeting him had been a turning point, a reminder that true strength came not from perfection but from resilience, humility, and the willingness to rise above adversity. Inspired by his example, she resolved to embrace her own challenges with the same courage and optimism that Jason embodied. As the plane descended toward its destination, Jason glanced out the window, watching as the city skyline came into view. He felt a sense of gratitude, not just for the success he had achieved, but for the lessons he had learned along the way. Life had thrown its share of obstacles at him, but he had faced them head-on, refusing to let bitterness or negativity define him. And now, as he prepared to land, he knew that the future held endless possibilities. Behind him, Rachel smiled to herself, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. Though their paths might never cross again, she knew that Jason's story would stay with her forever, a beacon of hope and inspiration guiding her through life's twists and turns. The private jet touched down gently on the runway, its wheels kissing the tarmac with a soft hum. As the plane slowed to a stop, the passengers began gathering their belongings, eager to disembark and continue with their day. The earlier tension had faded entirely, replaced by a quiet sense of calm. For Jason Carter, the journey was over, but for others, especially Rachel Monroe, the experience felt far from finished. Eric Dawson emerged from the cockpit, his face still tinged with unease. He knew he couldn't leave things unresolved. Walking down the aisle, he stopped near Jason's seat and cleared his throat softly. "Mr. Carter," he said, his voice steady but laced with sincerity, "I just wanted to thank you again for your understanding earlier. I truly regret what happened, and I'll do everything I can to ensure it never happens again." Jason looked up from adjusting his jacket and gave Eric a small, reassuring smile. "It's all right," he replied. "Mistakes happen. What matters is how we handle them, and you've handled this well. Let's move forward." Eric nodded, relief washing over him. Though he doubted he could fully undo the damage caused by his actions, Jason's words offered some measure of closure. He stepped aside as ground staff opened the cabin door, allowing the passengers to exit one by one. Rachel lingered in her seat, watching as Jason stood up and prepared to leave. She didn't want the conversation they'd shared to end so abruptly. Summoning her courage, she approached him before he reached the doorway. "Mr. Carter," she said, her tone earnest, "before you go, I just wanted to say thank you. Talking to you has been incredibly inspiring. I feel like I've learned so much from our chat." Jason paused, turning to face her with a warm expression. "You're welcome," he said kindly, "and thank you for taking the time to listen. It's not every day I get to share my story with someone who genuinely cares." Rachel smiled, feeling a rush of gratitude. "If you don't mind, I'd love to stay in touch. Maybe we could grab coffee sometime when you're back in town." Jason chuckled lightly, pulling out his phone. "Sure thing," he said. "Let's exchange numbers." After quickly swapping contact information, he added, "Take care of yourself, Rachel. And remember what we talked about. Focus on what really matters." With that, Jason stepped off the plane, disappearing into the bustling terminal below. Rachel watched him go, her heart swelling with admiration and determination. Meeting him had been a gift, an unexpected moment of clarity that would stay with her long after the flight ended. Outside the terminal, Jason spotted his wife, Maria, waiting patiently by the arrivals gate. Her bright smile lit up the space as soon as she saw him. They embraced warmly, sharing a brief kiss before heading toward baggage claim. Maria glanced at him curiously as they walked. "How was your trip?" she asked. "It started off interestingly," Jason admitted with a wry grin. "But it ended well. Remind me to tell you about it later." Maria raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. She knew Jason well enough to recognize when he needed time to process something. Instead, she simply slipped her hand into his, offering silent support as they made their way to the car. Back inside the terminal, Rachel found herself lingering near the windows, staring out at the planes taxiing across the airfield. Her mind was buzzing with thoughts about everything Jason had shared. His stories of resilience, leadership, and purpose resonated deeply with her, sparking a desire to live more intentionally. She realized that for too long she had let fear and self-doubt hold her back from pursuing opportunities, speaking up when it mattered, and embracing challenges head-on. Determined to make a change, Rachel pulled out her notebook and began jotting down ideas. She listed goals she had always dreamed of achieving but never acted on: starting her own side business, volunteering for causes she cared about, and reconnecting with old friends who inspired her. Each item represented a step toward becoming the person she wanted to be, someone brave, compassionate, and driven. As she wrote, memories of Jason's advice echoed in her mind. "Focus on what really matters," he had said. Those simple words carried profound meaning now. Rachel understood that chasing perfection or worrying about other people's opinions wouldn't lead to fulfillment. True happiness came from living authentically, helping others, and making the most of each moment. Elsewhere in the terminal, Eric stood outside the jet, watching as ground crew members refueled and cleaned the aircraft. His hands were shoved deep into his pockets and his brow was furrowed in thought. Despite Jason's forgiveness, Eric couldn't shake the weight of his mistake. He replayed the events in his mind once again, analyzing every misstep and wondering how he could prevent similar situations in the future. "Hey, Eric," called out Mark, one of the ground staff members. "Everything okay? You look like you've got a lot on your mind." Eric sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, just thinking about today. I messed up big time, Mark. I accused the owner of the jet of being a trespasser because of how he looked. Turns out he's a decorated Navy SEAL and one of the most respected guys I've ever met." Mark whistled softly. "Wow, that must have been awkward." "It was worse than awkward," Eric admitted. "I let my assumptions get the better of me, and it cost me, and everyone else, a lot of stress. But I'm trying to learn from it. Moving forward, I need to be more mindful, more patient, and less quick to judge." Mark nodded approvingly. "That's a good mindset. We all make mistakes, but owning up to them and doing better next time, that's what counts." Eric appreciated the encouragement. Still, he knew that earning back trust wouldn't happen overnight. It would take consistent effort to prove that he had grown from the experience. As he climbed back into the cockpit to prepare for his next flight, Eric resolved to approach every interaction with greater empathy and care. Later that evening, Rachel sat in her hotel room scrolling through her phone. She had sent Jason a quick text thanking him once more for their conversation, and to her delight, he had responded almost immediately. "Glad I could help," he wrote. "Keep pushing forward. You've got this." Those words filled Rachel with renewed energy. She decided to start tackling her list of goals right away. First, she drafted a proposal for a project she had been hesitant to pitch at work. Then, she researched local volunteer organizations focused on education and mentorship programs. Finally, she reached out to an old friend she hadn't spoken to in years, apologizing for losing touch and suggesting they catch up soon. As she worked, Rachel noticed a shift in her mindset. The anxiety and self-doubt that usually plagued her decisions seemed quieter now, replaced by a sense of confidence and purpose. She reminded herself of Jason's example, how he had faced adversity with grace and perseverance, and drew strength from it. Meanwhile, Jason and Maria arrived home, greeted by the familiar comforts of their cozy living room. As they settled onto the couch together, Maria turned to him with a curious smile. "So," she said, "are you going to tell me about this interesting start to your trip?" Jason laughed, shaking his head. "You're not going to believe this," he began, recounting the events of the morning. By the time he finished, Maria was laughing too, shaking her head in disbelief. "Only you could handle something like that with such poise," she said, squeezing his hand affectionately. "I'm proud of you." Jason shrugged modestly. "It's just part of life. People make mistakes, and sometimes those mistakes teach us valuable lessons. In this case, maybe it reminded Eric to think twice before jumping to conclusions." Maria nodded thoughtfully. "And maybe it reminded Rachel to chase her dreams." Jason smiled, remembering the young woman who had approached him on the plane. "She seemed like someone with a lot of potential," he said. "I hope she finds her path." As the night wore on, both couples drifted off to sleep, each reflecting on the day's events in their own way. For Jason and Maria, it was another chapter in a life filled with purpose and connection. For Rachel, it marked the beginning of a new journey, one rooted in courage, authenticity, and gratitude. And for Eric, it served as a wake-up call, reminding him of the importance of empathy and humility in every aspect of life. Though their paths might never cross again, the ripple effects of that single flight would continue to shape their lives in meaningful ways. Sometimes the smallest moments could spark the biggest changes, and for everyone involved, this day had been proof of that truth. The next morning, Rachel woke up feeling different. There was a lightness in her chest, a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. The events of the previous day, the encounter with Jason Carter and the lessons he had shared, had ignited something inside her. She wasn't just going to let those moments fade into memory. She was determined to act on them. As sunlight streamed through her hotel window, she sat at the small desk in her room, penning notes and sketching out plans for the goals she had written down. Her first step was tackling the proposal for work. For months, Rachel had been hesitant to pitch an idea for a new marketing campaign because she feared rejection or criticism. But now, she reminded herself of Jason's words. Focus on what really matters. What mattered most wasn't whether her idea succeeded or failed. It was that she tried, that she put herself out there and contributed meaningfully. With newfound determination, she opened her laptop and began drafting the presentation. By lunchtime, Rachel had completed the proposal. It wasn't perfect, she knew that, but it was thoughtful and well-researched, reflecting hours of effort. Before second-guessing herself, she sent it off to her manager with a brief email explaining her vision. Hitting send felt like stepping off a ledge, but instead of fear, Rachel felt exhilaration. She had taken the first step toward embracing risk and uncertainty, and it felt empowering. Later that afternoon, Rachel visited one of the volunteer organizations she had researched. The group focused on mentoring underprivileged youth, helping them develop skills and confidence to pursue their dreams. When Rachel arrived at their office, she introduced herself to the coordinator, a kind woman named Linda, and explained why she wanted to get involved. "I've always believed in the power of education," Rachel said earnestly, "and I think I could make a difference here." Linda smiled warmly. "We're always looking for passionate volunteers," she replied. "Let's set you up with some training and pair you with a student who could benefit from your guidance." Rachel left the office feeling hopeful and excited about the opportunity. She realized that giving back wasn't just about making others' lives better. It also enriched her own life in ways she hadn't anticipated. Helping someone else achieve their potential would remind her of her own strength and resilience. Meanwhile, Eric Dawson prepared for his next flight, still carrying the weight of his mistake from the day before. Though Jason had forgiven him, Eric couldn't shake the lingering guilt. He decided to take action, not just by improving his own behavior, but by encouraging others to reflect on their biases too. During the pre-flight briefing with his crew, Eric spoke openly about what had happened. "I made a serious error in judgment yesterday," he admitted, his voice steady but sincere. "New mistakes happen, but we need to learn from them. I accused someone of being a threat based on how they looked without taking the time to verify the facts. It turned out that person was not only innocent, but also incredibly accomplished and deserving of respect. Moving forward, I want all of us to be mindful of our assumptions and prioritize empathy in every situation." His crew listened attentively, nodding in agreement. One of the flight attendants, Sarah, spoke up. "Thank you for sharing that, Eric. It's a good reminder for all of us to slow down and think before reacting." Eric appreciated the support. Though he knew he couldn't erase his mistake, he hoped that speaking openly about it would inspire positive change, not just within himself, but among his colleagues as well. Jason Carter spent the day catching up on emails and attending meetings related to his business ventures. Despite his busy schedule, he found himself reflecting on the unexpected encounter aboard the jet. He had met countless people over the years, but there was something special about Rachel Monroe. Her curiosity and sincerity stood out, reminding him of the importance of sharing stories and experiences to inspire others. That evening, as Jason sat on the couch with Maria, he mentioned Rachel's message. "She seems like someone who's ready to grow," he said thoughtfully. "It's nice to know that even a brief conversation can have an impact." Maria smiled. "That's one of your gifts, Jason. You don't just talk, you connect. People remember what you say because they feel heard and valued." Jason chuckled softly. "I guess so. Maybe someday we'll see what Rachel accomplishes. Who knows? She might surprise us all." Weeks passed, and the ripple effects of that single flight continued to unfold. Rachel threw herself into her new endeavors with enthusiasm. At work, her proposal was met with praise, and her manager approved the campaign, giving her the chance to lead the project. In her volunteer role, she formed a close bond with a teenage girl named Emily, who dreamed of becoming a graphic designer. Together, they worked on design projects, and Rachel watched as Emily's confidence grew week by week. For Eric, the experience became a turning point in his career. He implemented new protocols for passenger verification and encouraged open discussions about bias and inclusivity within his team. His efforts earned him recognition from his superiors, who praised his leadership and commitment to improvement. As for Jason, life carried on much as it always had. He remained humble despite his achievements, focusing on creating opportunities for others and making a positive impact. Occasionally, he exchanged texts with Rachel, checking in to see how she was doing. Each update filled him with pride, not because he had played a role in her journey, but because she had embraced it with courage and determination. One evening, Rachel received a text from Jason. "How's everything going? Still chasing those dreams?" She smiled, typing her reply. "Absolutely. Couldn't have done it without your inspiration. Thank you for reminding me what truly matters." When Jason read her message, he felt a quiet satisfaction. Life had taught him that the smallest actions could lead to the biggest changes, whether it was a conversation on a plane, a decision to forgive, or a choice to persevere. Every moment held the potential to shape the future, for ourselves and for others. In the end, the private jet incident wasn't just a story of misunderstanding and redemption. It was a testament to the power of connection, resilience, and growth. For Eric, it was a lesson in humility and empathy. For Rachel, it was a catalyst for transformation. And for Jason, it was a reminder that even heroes play small roles in the grand tapestry of life. Though their paths might never cross again, the four individuals, Jason, Rachel, Eric, and Maria, carried the lessons of that day with them, shaping their choices and inspiring others along the way. Sometimes the simplest moments leave the deepest marks, proving that change often begins where we least expect it. The next morning, Rachel woke up feeling different. There was a lightness in her chest, a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. The events of the previous day, the encounter with Jason Carter and the lessons he had shared, had ignited something inside her. She wasn't just going to let those moments fade into memory. She was determined to act on them. As sunlight streamed through her hotel window, she sat at the small desk in her room, penning notes and sketching out plans for the goals she had written down. Her first step was tackling the proposal for work. For months, Rachel had been hesitant to pitch an idea for a new marketing campaign because she feared rejection or criticism. But now, she reminded herself of Jason's words. She opened her laptop and began drafting the presentation. By lunchtime, Rachel had completed the proposal. It wasn't perfect, she knew that, but it was thoughtful and well-researched, reflecting hours of effort. Before second-guessing herself, she sent it off to her manager with a brief email explaining her vision. Hitting send felt like stepping off a ledge, but instead of fear, Rachel felt exhilaration. She had taken the first step toward embracing risk and uncertainty, and it felt empowering. Later that afternoon, Rachel visited one of the volunteer organizations she had researched. The group focused on mentoring underprivileged youth, helping them develop skills and confidence to pursue their dreams. When Rachel arrived at their office, she introduced herself to the coordinator, a kind woman named Linda, and explained why she wanted to get involved. "I've always believed in the power of education," Rachel said earnestly, "and I think I could make a difference here." Linda smiled warmly. "We're always looking for passionate volunteers," she replied. "Let's set you up with some training and pair you with a student who could benefit from your guidance." Rachel left the office feeling hopeful and excited about the opportunity. She realized that giving back wasn't just about making others' lives better. It also enriched her own life in ways she hadn't anticipated. Helping someone else achieve their potential would remind her of her own strength and resilience. Meanwhile, Eric Dawson prepared for his next flight, still carrying the weight of his mistake from the day before. Though Jason had forgiven him, Eric couldn't shake the lingering guilt. He decided to take action, not just by improving his own behavior, but by encouraging others to reflect on their biases too. During the pre-flight briefing with his crew, Eric spoke openly about what had happened.